Queen Rania seems to have two concerns. One is to improve the position of Arab women, and the second appears to be representing Arab world to the rest of the world. Now, in the process, it appears to me that she's trapped in two kinds of problems. One is, she talks about stereotypes and suggests that bad stereotypes are floating around, which must be replaced by accurate facts about the Arab people. And the second seems to be contained within the first, namely that there's something wrong with the stereotypes, which today are used by other people about the Arabs, and that something must be done about it. Now, I want to suggest to the Queen that this idea, namely that stereotypes as such are bad or good, and that one must replace stereotypes with accurate information about people, is a result of a stifling political correctness which has come to plague the intellectual world ever since the Second World War. Now, you see, the problem with political correctness is this: it simply presumes a very wrong idea, in fact a bankrupt idea, about what stereotypes are, and this idea is basically something that grew within the left liberal movements in the West. And it has been partly, for a period of time, used in a very unscientific way to criticize the fascist movement in Germany because it had stereotypes about the Jews, the homosexuals, and so on. And today it has become almost a dogma of all reasonable thinking people that stereotypes are something, basically the negative stereotypes are something that intelligent people should avoid. Now, of course, the problem with this idea is that it is absolute scientific nonsense. I mean, just because of the fact that majority of people think that stereotypes are bad, does not make stereotypes bad. In the last decade, for example, social psychologists, cognitive psychologists are beginning to inquire for the first time into the nature of stereotypes, how they come into being, why they persist, why do they reproduce themselves, and so on. The hypotheses are not clear, but the questions are, namely, that stereotypes seem to be a phenomenon which has existed, for instance, in Europe for a long period of time. While it is true that social psychologists claim that stereotypes are universal categories of human thinking, of human cognition, my own research suggests to me the following. Stereotypes have been developed primarily within the Western culture. When I say stereotypes, I am talking of what are called social stereotypes. They are developed by the Western culture in order to allow members of the Western culture to relate with people from other parts of the world, to relate to cultures other than the West, and also, in fact, to relate to other groups within the Western culture itself. Now, whether or not it is a universal human trait or not, the point remains that it is at least one way in which one group of people, according to my hypothesis, the Western culture, how they transmit knowledge, how they preserve knowledge about relating to and going about with other people. Now, the Queen, in that sense, I don't blame her, she's probably not a social psychologist. She seems to simply assume that we must do away with stereotypes, whereas neither my research nor the research of psychology shows that it is possible. In fact, it might not even be desirable to attempt, because it won't be possible to do so, to remove stereotypes from human thinking, or at least from the thinking of Western culture. So the first problem the Queen gets trapped in, as I said, is this kind of Western conception of why stereotypes are wrong. And the second is, of course, that somehow stereotypes distort how a group of people are presented. Now, in one of the videos, the Queen approvingly cites someone who says that we are forced to perceive other people in terms of our own cultural matrix, and she deplores it. Well, again, this is a wrong thing, because every human being, no matter, not just human beings, any being in fact, can only perceive the world in terms of categories that the person has. So if European culture describes another culture, it's going to describe it in European terms. So if the Arabs were to describe, which they have done, for example, of India, the country I come from, when they have described the Indians, the Arabs have done it, the Muslims have done it in terms of their categories. Now, if Indians were to do the same, they would make use of their categories. So to find it unfortunate is basically to find a humanness and humanity unfortunate. Now, there's nothing wrong that the Western culture has used its categories, nor is there anything wrong with the fact that they have developed stereotypes. But if the attempt is to represent Arabs or Indians or the Chinese in a way that European culture can understand, then what we need to do are two things. If you follow the hypothesis of most social psychologists, then you have to undertake a very serious research into human thinking. Well, they have been doing it. The second is, if you take my research results seriously, it means that if you want to understand stereotypes at all, before you decide whether you want to fight them or not, you have to undertake a very serious study of the Western culture. So to simply say, let's collect all the stereotypes that Western people have or other people have about Arabs, and then we'll come up with some kind of a folder or video film with all kinds of facts about Arabs and to give a good impression of Arabs, is very praiseworthy, but very naive. Because, first of all, stereotypes are not, as I said, prejudices. And besides, you will not fight prejudices with facts. So you have to understand what prejudices are. So I find it a very lovely initiative of the Queen of Jordan, that she wants to analyze, collect, and look at stereotypes. But I think, if at all, one has to understand and do something, whatever that something is about stereotypes, the focus must be on the following, namely, understand the Western culture. So if the Arab world wants to understand why there are stereotypes about them, then they should not indulge in navel gazing or produce colorful pamphlets. They should undertake a serious study of the history and traditions of the Western culture. So that would be my humble suggestion to the Queen.